So I recently shared this post about queueables in Apex, and some people asked, okay, so but what about the best practices, right? Because the code that I showed here, it is more like a mock code. It is not the code that I would actually write for production. So now I want to show you how to make out of all of this, how to make it production ready. Instead of passing a list of accounts, you usually want to pass there just a set of IDs. Here's what I mean. Bear with me for a second. So we're going to pass here set of IDs, and we're going to say these are account IDs. And we're going to have the same variable here. And we're going to make this variable private. If you can, make variables always private. It reduces the complexity of your code and it makes less dependency in the code. So we're trying to make it private. Okay. And here we're going to say account IDs equal to account IDs, like this. Now, this will make sure that you cannot instantiate an instance of your Queueable without passing their account IDs. Your whole functionality doesn't make any sense if you don't have any accounts to synchronize. Now the question might be, why don't we pass here immediately a list of accounts, right? It makes sense because we want to synchronize accounts, so why don't we pass accounts? Those accounts, they would go, for example, in this case, from a trigger, and we're going to modify trigger in a second. We don't want to do that because trigger.new only has records that don't have any relationship fields. If you want to have those relationship fields, you need to query them again here, which means that you still need an additional query. Now, when you pass here a set of IDs, you make sure that the query that you're doing will be inside of the Queueable, which makes the Queueable in itself reusable for multiple different purposes. Because now, when you want to use this Queueable, you don't have to think about making a query, for example, here to pass all the right fields. You don't even know what are those fields right now, but you take care about all of that just inside of the Queueables, okay? So now here, we would need to query those accounts. So I would create here public query accounts by ID. And now I can iterate through them and then update. I want to put this whole thing into separate either class, or you want to put it at least into a separate method. And of course, we want to make it private. This one we also want to make private. And then here it's going to be, let's say it's going to be string account, and then we're going to get there an account. We're going to put all of that there. And we're going to return response to. Now here, only going to get string would be equal to sync account. And then with this sync response, we can put here. Or if you want, you can even just immediately merge them together like this. Doesn't really matter that much. Another thing that we want to do is that you want to use your named credentials. For that, the way you usually do it is by setting up a constant, something like this. This thing here, it should be the named credential thing, okay? And then you can use this endpoint here. And then, of course, post request, you also want to put it there as a constant so that you don't hardcode those things. It's going to be public static final post request, and that's going to be post. And you want to use it here, okay? We do those things so that if we want a reference from somewhere else, for example, from a test, then you can just use it here. And if you modify here something, then it is also modified immediately in the test, and you don't have to go into multiple systems to search for the modifications. Now it seems to be that we deployed it. So this is Queueable close to something that I would write in the real world. Now, few things that I would do actually a little bit different. You see that our Queueable here, it kind of mixes together the callout and the Queueable functionality itself. I would create another class here, and I would call it sync system callout, just to separate those things, and in case you might want to reuse this method here. So I'm going to take this method out and I'm going to put it here into this separate method. So basically nothing crazy changes, it's just we are moving this part of the functionality into a separate class. So what happens basically in our execution now is that we are separating our whole code base into 3 different layers. We're separating it into the logic layer, which is the Queueable. This is where we perform our actual logic, or where we define the logic. And then we have the communication layer. It's kind of the layer between Salesforce itself, right? So here that would be this part, that would be Salesforce, that is Salesforce. That is also Salesforce actually, together with this one. But this one is responsible for communicating between the server and Salesforce back, right? So we're putting it in a separate class to create a separate layer from it. And our Queueable, it calls this callout. And this callout is responsible for all the communication or all the wrapping around of the communication that you want. For example, it can also involve parsing data from JSON into the Salesforce data or from the Salesforce data into the JSON. What also we can do here, we can create another layer, so to say, which is sometimes people call it persistence. You also have here somewhere the Salesforce database. And some people, they create kind of layer in between of communication. That's, you don't need it if you don't have many SQL queries, but since we are speaking more enterprise ready code, that's usually what you also would do. And then you're creating here, and some people call it persistence, some people call it select. I like to keep things even simpler and just say account queries without saying anything fancy. And then the only thing that you do is you take out the queries out of all the parts of the functionality that you have and you put them there. And here you only say account queries.query by account. Now this does exactly the same, because now here, if you look at this thing, if you have multiple different logic classes that do something, oh my god, come back, this one, Queueable, let's say this is like logic 2, right? You can reference this persistent class and you can call it again. So you make those SQL queries more reusable. Now, a big downside of all of that is that whenever you take your class that was one class and you create 3 classes out of it, you introduced more complexity and more dependencies between those different classes. And this is a trade-off. This is a trade-off that you only should go for if you actually need it. Because now you need to write tests for all of them. If you don't have any system that needs all of this voodoo thing, you can just write everything into one class and that's going to be already good. It's only for heavy systems where you have a lot of code and where you need to make sure it fits well and you have different modules and you have a lot of reusability and all of that. That's when you need to do that. Everything else, no. And for those who want to learn more, just hit me a message. If you understand what I write here, and if you want to learn how to basically write these things on the enterprise level, that's exactly what I do. I take people who already know how to code, who are already good with writing Queueables, for example, but don't know how to write them with the best practices, how people write them in the real world. So if you're kind of admin lopper, write me. That's exactly what I do for a living. All right? See you in the next one. Bye-bye, everyone.